The desert is a place of scarcity. No water, no vegetation, very little in the way of natural resources. It's not the ideal place for many to live. As a result, this is seen as a nowhere in the middle of nowhere. It's a place that's seen as a place where people only live when they've got no other choice. As a result, it's remained a frontier. And while this is definitely a challenge, I think it also presents an opportunity. See, being in the desert and on the frontier make the perfect breeding ground for entrepreneurship and growth. The dictionary gives two definitions for the word frontier. The first is a border between two places. A frontier is also the edge of settled land. Our desert happens to be both. So when you're in our frontier, you're either an immigrant or you're a pioneer. In either case, you're a stranger in a strange land on the fringes of the old, pushing for something new. You see, the new is very normal for us. New for us is a way of life. If you look at our frontier, it's very difficult not to find somebody who's first generation something. I'm sure if all of you went home and looked in the mirror, you would see somebody who is doing something for the first time in your family's history. Perhaps you're first generation American, first generation English speaking. Like many in the room, you might be first generation college graduate, a first generation professional. You might be a first generation member of the military, a first generation El Pasoan, a first generation artist or entrepreneur. It's nearly impossible to go out into our community and find somebody who's not first generation something. And being first generational makes you very accustomed to the new. New is the way of life for you. If you're new to the city, maybe the people are new and the culture is new. If you're new to the country, then the laws are new. Perhaps you found some newfound freedom. But whatever your circumstances are, the opportunities and the challenges are definitely new. And this is really important. We become really good at dealing with the new. New is what we see, it's what we breathe, it's what we think. And this is important because in other places of the world, new is not the normal. New is not what happens on a daily basis. And this can be problematic because new can be scary. New comes with uncertainty. When we're doing something new, we don't know what's going to happen, and the brain doesn't like this uncertainty. We don't like not knowing what's going to happen to us. And so we get anxious, and so we get scared. And so in regular places of the world where new is not the norm, people might not have the courage to go out and embark on new things. They may not go out and create new things. They may not challenge the status quo, whether it's societies or their businesses or their families or even their own. But not us here on the frontier. On the frontier, we're very used to the new. We're very good at the new. And so we're able to go out and attempt to do these new things. You can look at our population as proof. As I mentioned, if you're on the frontier, you're either a pioneer or you're an immigrant. For the people that moved here from other places, they were willing to risk the uncertainty that comes from being in a new place. For the people who've decided to stay here, they're willing to build a foundation on a place without foundations. And I mean that metaphorically and literally. You're going to spend a lot of time and money trying to build on the side of a mountain or in the ever-shifting sand. So our people here are very good at taking the new. And it raises this question, why? Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we put ourselves in this environment where we have to deal with so much uncertainty? I think it's because being on the frontier and being in this environment provides a very compelling risk profile for us. In the business world, investors look for various characteristics for their investments. One of the most simple and effective investment strategies is to look for investments that have a small downside and a big upside. And I think that's exactly what we have here in the frontier. See, when the world around you is new, you have nothing to fall back on. When you're new to the world, you have no reputation to destroy. If you're paving the way for the first time, if you're the person who's doing something for the very first time in your family's history, there are no standards for you to fail. You have very little to lose, and so you've got this very small downside. On the flip side of that, when everything is new, you're left with a lot of promise. When you've got no history, all you're left with is a future. People talk about this in business all the time. Companies will fight to be the first to market. Inventors will toil to innovate on emerging new technologies. When the world is open and you're not boxed in, you have all the space you could need and want to grow. And this is incredibly valuable. We've got this massive upside available to us when things are new. And so we've got this great risk profile. We've got this small downside and this big upside here on the frontier. And not only is it this opportunity available to us, we're very well equipped to take it because we're all so used to dealing with the new. Because new is the way of life for us, because new is the everyday. The desert itself imparts a particular type of skills that makes us better at dealing with the new. And this is because living in the desert is harsh. An average day for us is incredibly hot and bright. And on the few days that it rains, it often leads to flooding. If you're waiting for a nice breeze to cool you down, it's probably going to kick up a bunch of sand and dirt. The plants aren't very friendly, and the animals are trying to kill you. Living in the desert is harsh. It's full of extremes. But it teaches us a very important lesson. It teaches us that just because things are hard outside doesn't mean that we should hide away. Just because there's a rough day outside doesn't mean that we should close ourselves in. We know that's not a great way to live. And it teaches us this very important lesson, which is just because things are hard doesn't mean that they're impossible. This is a very valuable skill. The most important ability an entrepreneur can have is the ability not to give up. And this is because every entrepreneur is going to come across difficulty and failure. There's a saying that the entrepreneurs that don't succeed aren't the ones who failed. Failure is inevitable. The entrepreneurs that don't succeed are the ones who've given up when they come across that failure. So the successful entrepreneurs are the ones who come across failure and keep going. The great entrepreneurs are the ones who not only keep going, they're the ones that learn from their failures. And not only do they learn from their failures, they get really good at identifying these challenges and building upon them and learning from their trade and their craft. And so great entrepreneurs have a special power of perception. They can see challenges as opportunities. I think being in the desert allows us to naturally have this similar power of perception. I'll give you a really simple example, which is rain. So when it rains here in the desert, we think it's nice weather. People will get to social media. They'll get to taking pictures of the beautiful day that we're having outside. All of your coworkers and your classmates will comment about how nice of a day we're having. Apparently, that's really weird. In the rest of the world, rain is not seen as good weather. Rain is seen as gloomy and dreary. You even just think about the words that the way that we use the word rain in colloquialisms. It's not a nice thing to rain on somebody's parade. And if somebody's got a dark cloud following them, it's because they're depressed, not because they're having a nice day. So even with something as simple as rain, we have the ability to see an opportunity where other people might see a challenge. So what, you might be thinking to yourself, what does this all matter? We've got this special ability to see opportunities where other people see challenges. We have this great risk profile available to us. What does it all matter when we still have less than other places of the world? Other places in the world can do more and can do it easier, and they've just done a lot more than we have. And while I think there's a certain truth to that, I think looking at things that way fails to see the massive opportunity that lies ahead of us. I'll give two stories that changed my perception of this growing up. So, like many people here, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. I grew up on the outskirts of El Paso and Canutillo, and like many young people growing up in El Paso, I just couldn't wait to get out of the city and out of my parents' house. And so I came to UTEP for my bachelor's degree, and I put my head down, and I slammed through college in 3 years just so that I could leave. I did a lot of homework, but I didn't do much else. I didn't gather very many life experiences. And on my 21st birthday, I moved to California to start law school. When I got there, I was blown away by the talent and accomplishments of the students around me. And I went to the dean of admissions to express this existential dread that I was feeling. I was no smarter than anyone else. I knew no more than anyone else. I was no more accomplished than any of my classmates. And in most circumstances, I was significantly less accomplished than the people around me. I was a nobody from the middle of nowhere, and I just felt like I didn't belong. She said something to me that really changed my perspective on this, and I think it applies to everything that we've got going on in the desert. She said, "It's not your accomplishments that matter. It's your trajectory that's exciting." I was so obsessed with measuring my accomplishments and with drawing comparisons with myself that I hadn't taken the time to appreciate the incredible rate at which I was moving. The second story I'd like to share relates back to our desert. When I first moved to California, I felt this weird claustrophobia. I felt like the walls were closing in around me. Everywhere I went, I just felt like I was really shut in. I chalked it up to the anxiety of being in a new city, to the stress of being in law school. But even after I settled into the routine of school and settled into California, I still felt claustrophobic. It wasn't until I came back to El Paso to visit one day that I realized exactly what it was. The trees and the buildings in California were blocking my view of the sky. I had grown up in this environment where everything was incredibly open, and I was used to waking up and being able to see horizon to horizon. And so when I moved to California, I went to this place with all the resources at its disposal, but I'd given up the openness that we have here in El Paso. This openness and this growth trajectory aren't for everyone. Some people like being a part of something bigger. Some people like living among history. Some people crave the electricity that comes from big, energized crowds. Some people relish the vantage point that comes from standing on the shoulders of giants. And that can be fun. I can appreciate that. But over the last few years, I've learned that I prefer the blank page over the well-written storybook. There's something that's very exciting about being in the unknown, about being on the frontier. And to people on the outside, I might be a nobody in the middle of nowhere, but to me, there's nothing else I'd rather be. Thank you.